1938, Tibet. A team of German SS officers arrives at a remote monastery. They're not there to pray. They're measuring skulls, taking thousands of photographs, asking monks about ancient legends. Their mission, ordered personally by Heinrich Himmler, find the hidden kingdom of Shambhala. 1920s, Moscow. In a secret laboratory run by the Soviet secret police, a cryptographer named Gleb Boki experiments with Tibetan meditation techniques. His goal, according to later accounts, merge Buddhist Tantra with communist ideology to engineer the perfect Soviet citizen. He's planning an expedition to retrieve the wisdom of Shambhala. Same decade. Nicholas Roerich, a Russian mystic, spends 5 years wandering Central Asia with a peace banner, funded by Henry Wallace, who would later become US Vice President. He paints visions of glowing cities in the mountains, claims telepathic contact with hidden masters. He's looking for Shambhala. Why were Nazis, Soviet secret police, and American-backed mystics all searching for the same Buddhist kingdom at the same time? What did they think was hidden there? And the thing that keeps me up at night, Roerich insisted he made contact. Others came back convinced they had brushed against something unusual. Something about that search stayed with them. I'm Matt, and I grew up wanting to be Indiana Jones. Poster on my wall, the hat. A rope I pretended was a whip. But honestly, my real obsession was the lost cities. Atlantis sinking beneath the waves. El Dorado buried in the jungle. The golden cities of Shambhala. I read every book I could find about places that supposedly existed, but nobody could prove. And here's the funny thing. I grew up, became interested in Buddhism, and thought I'd left all that childhood stuff behind. Then I discovered Shambhala. Turns out Buddhism has its own hidden kingdom. And unlike Atlantis or El Dorado, this one has a 1,000-year paper trail, 4 government-funded expeditions, and geographic markers. I'm back to hunting for lost cities. Except this time, the map is a meditation manual. Quick note before we go further. This is going to lean more into mystery and legend than pure Buddhist doctrine. Some of what follows is history, some is doctrine, some is testimony. I'm not pretending those are the same thing, but the lines between them, that's where it gets interesting. According to the Kalachakra tradition, the ancient Tibetan Buddhist teaching, not the modern organization, Shambhala is a kingdom tied to a future Dharma restoration. Kalachakra means wheel of time, linking cosmology, inner practice, and a prophesied future. The texts describe it as a place where the Dharma survives in its purest form, guarded by enlightened rulers, protected from the chaos of the outside world, where wisdom hasn't been corrupted, where practice hasn't been diluted, where enlightened society actually exists. That's the promise. The texts also give an answer that makes no sense. A kingdom existing in 3 places at once, a map to a location that shouldn't be possible, and a prophecy saying we're running out of time. But nobody can answer this. Is it real? Today we're hunting for Shambhala, following the maps, tracking the seekers, examining the evidence. Maybe we'll understand why they're all still looking. And maybe, just maybe, we'll understand what it means that nobody's found it. Or have they? Before I show you the maps they followed, you need to see who went looking. Because this wasn't a few bored explorers with family money, governments got involved. 1920s through 1940s. Something strange happens. Multiple countries, opposed political systems, launch expeditions to Tibet and Central Asia, all hunting the same thing. The timing doesn't feel random. Ernst Schaefer, Nazi SS officer. In 1938, he leads a 5-man SS expedition into Tibet, funded by Heinrich Himmler's occult research division. The theory behind the mission is strange, that ancient Aryans fled to the Himalayas and preserved their knowledge in Shambhala. If that were true, finding the kingdom would validate the entire Nazi worldview. The team spends months visiting monasteries, measuring skulls, photographing manuscripts, interviewing monks about hidden valleys and ancient migrations. In August 1939, they return with 50,000 photographs and a classified report. 1 month later, World War II begins. Schaefer delivers a private report to Himmler. And after the war, much of the expedition's material disappears into Soviet archives and private collections.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
While the Nazis searched for racial origins, the Soviets had a different obsession. Gleb Boki, Soviet secret police cryptographer. He partners with occult researcher Alexander Barchenko. According to historian Andrei Znamensky and Red Shambhala, they set up a Moscow laboratory merging tantric practices with consciousness research. The idea was simple: create the ideal Soviet citizen. They begin planning an expedition to Inner Asia to retrieve the knowledge of Shambhala. But rival Soviet agencies start fighting over control of the project, and eventually the whole thing collapses. Then comes 1937 and Stalin's Great Purge. Both men are arrested and executed, but Boki never recanted. While secret police ran underground experiments, an American mystic painted visions. Nicholas Roerich, Russian painter and mystic. Between 1924 and 1928, he wanders across Mongolia, Tibet, and Siberia, carrying what he calls a peace banner. Roerich believes Shambhala is real, a hidden kingdom guided by enlightened masters. He paints hundreds of images of a glowing city in the mountains. The same image appears again and again across decades of paintings. Roerich becomes convinced the city is real. He claims contact with hidden masters, but he never finds a physical location. Alexandra David-Neel, French explorer. In the early 20th century, she spends 14 years studying Tibetan Buddhism and becomes the first Western woman to reach Lhasa. Instead of searching for a hidden kingdom, she interviews monks and travelers who claim they have visited Shambhala. She documents stories of Lungam runners, practitioners said to move extraordinary distances in trance-like states. Her conclusion is more historical. She suspects Shambhala may once have been a real Buddhist center around ancient Balkh in Afghanistan. A civilization destroyed by conquest, its teachings preserved in hidden valleys. It's a historical explanation for a myth that refuses to disappear. She spends the next 50 years writing about Tibetan mysteries, and she never stops wondering if Shambhala might be real. 4 hunters, following the same clues. Nazis wanted power, Soviets wanted control, Roerich wanted peace, David-Neel wanted truth. But none of them were looking for the same treasure. The Nazis believed Shambhala preserved ancient Aryan wisdom, a lost source of spiritual power. The Soviets thought it might contain techniques for transforming the human mind. Roerich believed enlightened masters lived there, guiding humanity. And David-Neel suspected something simpler, a hidden Buddhist civilization that survived history. Shambhala pulls on very different people for very different reasons. To understand why, we need to look at what they were actually searching for, the text they all kept coming back to. Most ancient legends describe impossible places with vague poetry. A magical land beyond the sunset. An island of immortals somewhere in the ocean. The Shambhala texts aren't like that. They read less like poetry and more like a set of instructions. The source is the Kalachakra Tantra, which appears in Tibet around the 10th or 11th century. But according to Buddhist tradition, the teaching goes much further back, to the Buddha himself, who is said to have taught it to King Suchandra of Shambhala. From that perspective, this isn't random folklore. It belongs inside the Dharma, but the kingdom story comes later. The Kalachakra Tantra is one of the highest tantric texts in Tibetan Buddhism. Complex, esoteric, requires initiation to practice. And buried inside it, descriptions of Shambhala. Weirdly detailed descriptions. Later Kalachakra commentaries, particularly the Vimala-Prabha, describe the original kingdom under King Manjushrakirti with impossible precision. 300,510 people. Not about 300,000, not hundreds of thousands. 300,510. Think about that. Who invents a population census for a mythical kingdom? 96 provinces, 8 petal-shaped regions around a center, a ring of snow mountains, named peaks, rivers with directions, city dimensions. It doesn't read like a vague paradise. It reads like somebody tried to map it. Compare that to other legendary places. Atlantis, Plato said, somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Vague. El Dorado, city of gold in the jungle. Generic. Shangri-La. James Hilton invented it in 1933 as deliberate fiction for his novel, Lost Horizon. Perfect timing, real expeditions happening, newspapers full of Tibet stories. Hilton blends Shambhala legends with Western fantasy, eternal youth, perfect peace, no suffering. Book becomes a bestseller, movie in 1937. Now you've got two versions fighting for attention, the real Buddhist Shambhala and Hollywood's Shangri-La. Most Westerners conflate them, think they're the same place. They're not. Back to the Kalachakra descriptions. The texts say, north of India, beyond the Himalayas, where snow mountains form a ring. Multiple texts give consistent directions, landmark after landmark, distance measurements. Tibetan pilgrims carried actual guidebooks like medieval Christians had guides to Jerusalem, except this place supposedly doesn't exist. Over the last century, explorers proposed 3 main locations. Some placed Shambhala far to the north in the Altai Mountains of Central Asia, the region Roerich searched for years. He believed Baluka Mountain was an entrance to the kingdom, a common belief in that area. Tibetan traditions often point instead to the Himalayas themselves, describing valleys called Bayul that only appear to those spiritually prepared. And scholars like Alexandra David-Neel suggested something more historical, that Shambhala may once have been a real Buddhist center around ancient Balkh in Afghanistan. Later transformed into legend after invasions scattered its teachers. She even offered the Persian Shami-Bala, meaning elevated candle, as a possible etymology. 3 different maps, 3 different explanations, and none of them confirmed. Why would someone fabricate geography with this level of detail? So what is this? Pure invention? Maybe. But then why all the specificity? A real place? Maybe. But where? Or something stranger, a geography that is also spiritual at the same time. That third option? That's what Buddhist teachers say. But check this out. We've mapped the entire planet from space. Google Earth, satellite imagery, LiDAR scanning through jungle canopies. We can see everything. Except, places keep appearing. 2014. Dr. Michael Taylor from Caltech and the China Earthquake Administration discover a buried canyon under the Yarlung Changpo using seismic imaging. Scientists point equipment at what they think is regular river valley. Instead, one of the largest geographic formations on Earth. Deeper than the Grand Canyon, completely hidden under ice and rock. Nobody knew it was there. Not locals, not satellites, not centuries of explorers. If we missed that until 2014, what else are we missing? 2020, scientists discover a massive reef system previously undocumented. 2021, LiDAR reveals a lost Mayan city. Modern geoscience still finds unmapped features, valleys, canyon systems, entire geographic formations. So I took the Kalachakra descriptions, the ones about mountain rings, river systems, specific landmarks, overlaid them on modern satellite maps of the Himalayas, found several valleys that match the geographic patterns, depending on how you interpret the markers, a handful of places where the description fits. Some only confirmed with modern imaging, in the last 20 years. The Nazis went looking, the Soviets went looking. Maybe they searched in the wrong valleys. Or maybe the geography is only part of the answer. What if the map is accurate, but it's not a map for bodies? What if it's a map for minds? Because the texts don't say Shambhala appeared out of nowhere. They tell a specific origin story. 20,000 people, a terrible decision, and a disappearance that changed everything. "159 BC, a king makes a terrible mistake. 20,000 people disappear into the mountains." This is the origin story of Shambhala. Sounds like mythology until you check the historical timeline. King Manjushri rules a kingdom of 300,510 people, located somewhere in what's now northern India or Central Asia. His population follows the Mlecha religion. Many worship the sun, solar deities, astronomical practices. Buddhism is spreading rapidly through the region. The king receives Kalachakra teachings, the ones tracing back to Buddha's original transmission to King Suchandra, becomes an enthusiastic convert. Decides to convert his entire kingdom. Offers the teachings. Most people accept. 20,000 refuse. They cling to solar worship, Surya Samadhi, the way of light. These aren't random citizens. Sun priests, astronomers, scholars, mystics, the intellectual elite. The king gives them an ultimatum: convert or leave. Imagine being one of those 20,000. Not angry, not protesting, just leaving, carrying your whole world on your back. They gather their sacred texts, their astronomical tools, their ritual objects. Walk north into the snow mountains. The king watches them go. Then he realizes what he's done. These 20,000, they were the wisest people in his kingdom, the best scholars, the deepest mystics, the most advanced practitioners. Sends messengers begging them to return. Some do return, accept Buddhism, rejoin the kingdom. The king teaches them Kalachakra intensely, trying to preserve what he almost lost. Others refuse. They've gone too far, seen too much, found something in those mountains. The king never sees them again. According to the texts, those who didn't return founded Shambhala. They synthesized their solar wisdom with Dharma teachings, created a kingdom based on both scientific knowledge and spiritual practice, built it in a valley system, protected by geography, protected by spiritual practice, only accessible to those with proper karma and discipline. King Manjushri rules until 59 BC, exactly 100 years. Abdicates to his son Pundarika, dies soon after. According to the texts, he enters the Sambhogakaya, the enlightened dimension. His son continues teaching Kalachakra to those who returned. The others vanish from historical record. Mythology, right? Except, check the historical timeline. 159 BC, Buddhism spreading aggressively through Central Asia. Archaeological evidence confirms this. Solar worship widespread in the region. Multiple cultures practiced it. Advanced astronomical knowledge existed. The Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, the developing Kushan Empire. Yuezhi migrations happening around this time, displaced peoples moving north into mountain regions. Kushan Empire rising, syncretic culture blending Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian traditions. The timeline fits. Population displacements, cultural synthesis, mountain migrations, all historically documented. Look at archaeological possibilities. Tarim Basin mummies, European features, Central Asian location, right time period. Evidence of displaced populations moving into mountain regions. The Bayul tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. Teachers in the Tibetan lineages often describe Bayul as valleys with isolated populations. This is documented practice. Pamako Valley discovered in the 1990s. Completely isolated population. Unique Buddhist practices found nowhere else. When the center collapses, people head for the mountains. History does this over and over. Tibetan refugees in 1959 fled to valleys, some valleys in the Himalayas discovered only recently, populations living in isolation for centuries. Over 2 millennia, more than 2,000 years, about 22 centuries since those 20,000 left. If they founded a kingdom, if they had children, built communities, preserved their practices, what would that civilization look like today? Would they have chosen preservation over progress, isolation over integration? Over 2 millennia. If they're still there, they've been separate from us this whole time. 4 expeditions in the 1930s and 1940s, all searching at the same time. Different hunters, different methods, but they all returned transformed by what they encountered. So what happened to them out there? They all went looking. They all came back. But none of them found the same thing. What did they actually find? The Nazis. They returned with 50,000 photographs, measurements, geographic surveys, and nothing that proved their theories. But that didn't matter, because they filtered everything through racial ideology. Every skull they measured became evidence of Aryan origins. Every monastery they visited became a possible refuge for ancient masters. Every text they photographed became proof that the Himalayas preserved pure knowledge. They saw what they wanted to see, and turned an expedition into evidence for genocide wrapped in spiritual quest. The problem wasn't the evidence. The problem was the lens. When you go looking for racial validation, everything becomes racial evidence. They went searching for power, found nothing, claimed everything. The Soviets. They documented meditation techniques, breathing practices, altered states of consciousness, real effects from real practices. But they interpreted it all through the lens of control and engineering. To them, Tibetan meditation wasn't about liberation. It was about creating better workers, more loyal soldiers, ideologically pure citizens. They tried to weaponize consciousness, reduce enlightenment to a reproducible protocol, strip away the spiritual and keep the mechanism. And when that didn't work, when the techniques resisted being turned into tools, they called it a failure. Both men executed, research destroyed, project erased. But the real failure wasn't the purge. The real failure was thinking you could engineer your way to what Shambhala represented. They went looking for power over minds, found techniques that only work when you let go of control. Roerich and David-Neel, 2 different failures. Roerich spent decades painting the same glowing city, same vision, same certainty. He believed he had made contact, believed enlightened masters had shown him Shambhala. Maybe he did experience something real. Maybe it was mystical obsession. Maybe both. Either way, he couldn't bring anyone else there, couldn't prove it, couldn't find it on a map. Visionary certainty without evidence. David-Neel took the opposite approach. She collected testimony, cross-referenced stories, traced historical patterns. She identified Balkh as the most plausible location, an actual Buddhist center, destroyed by conquest, teachings scattered into hidden valleys. It was careful, disciplined, scholarly work. But Balkh was already gone. The physical center destroyed centuries ago. If Shambhala had been there, she was looking at ruins. Evidence-based inquiry pointing to something that no longer existed. 4 hunters, 4 different outcomes. The Nazis saw racial destiny. The Soviets saw human engineering. Roerich saw mystical visions. David-Neel saw historical fragments. Same texts, same region, same clues, completely different discoveries. And that tells you something crucial about Shambhala. It's not just that they failed to find it, it's that what they found depended entirely on what they brought with them. The Kalachakra teachings say, Shambhala exists for those who have the karma to reach it. But karma doesn't just mean moral worthiness. It means preparation, cultivation, the kind of mind you've developed through years of practice. The Nazis brought hatred. The Soviets brought domination. Roerich brought mystical certainty. David-Neel brought intellectual rigor. but no inner preparation. None of them brought what the tradition says you need. Which raises the question, what were they actually searching for? A hidden valley? An enlightened civilization? Or something that operates on rules none of them understood? Because the texts describe Shambhala in a way that makes no sense, unless it exists on multiple levels at the same time. Shambhala exists on 3 levels simultaneously, all 3 at once. Level 1, the place. At the level of the tradition, it's treated as real geography. Kalachakra teachings say Shambhala is an actual location, a valley system somewhere in the Himalayas or Central Asia, protected by geographic barriers, the ring of mountains described in texts. An isolated population descended from the original 20,000 who left King Manjushrakirti's kingdom, over 2 millennia preserving ancient wisdom traditions. It's not accessible by normal travel, like the Baal tradition, valleys that only appear to those who are ready. Recent discoveries prove this concept has basis in reality. Pimako Valley, discovered in the 1990s, completely isolated population, Buddhist practices found nowhere else. Modern geoscience keeps revealing previously unmapped regions, valleys, isolated populations, unique lineages. The Baal tradition isn't just mythology, it's documented practice. So yes, the map matters, but it isn't enough. Level 2, the layer. Shambhala exists on what texts call the subtle physical plane. Remember the 31 planes of existence? We covered this in a previous video. Realms that occupy the same space as our world, but exist at a subtler level of reality. And I'm using modern language here as a metaphor, not as physics. Shambhala is one of them. Think about Pure Land realms we covered. Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land, Aksobaya's Pure Land, described as real places with geography, with beings living there. But they exist in a different dimension, accessible through spiritual practice, through purified karma, through proper cultivation. Shambhala works similarly with one difference. Pure Lands exist in completely separate realms. Shambhala exists on Earth but shifted, occupying same space as physical geography, subtler level. Like ultraviolet light all around us, most species can't see it, or how dogs hear frequencies humans can't perceive. The idea is, the kingdom is there, but your perception isn't ready for it yet. Level 3, the mirror. Shambhala, as state of consciousness, the kingdom within. When you perfect Kalachakra practice, texts say you reach Shambhala. Does that mean it's only in your mind? In this tradition, the outer journey and the inner journey are tied together. You can't really separate them. What you find reflects what you've become. The Nazis went with racial ideology, interpreted everything through that lens. The Soviets went with control mechanisms, filtered their experiences through engineering. Roerich went with mystical attachment, saw visions he couldn't verify. David-Neel went with genuine inquiry, found credible testimony but no physical proof. The tradition says, the kingdom becomes accessible to those who are prepared. Preparation here isn't moral superiority, it's cultivation. So the Tibetan tradition doesn't force you to pick one. Shambhala can be a place, a subtle realm, and a transformation of mind at the same time. This is how Tibetan Buddhism works, multiple levels of truth together. What do the lamas actually say? Teachers in the Kalachakra lineage often repeat, Shambhala exists for those who have the karma to reach it. The path to Shambhala is meditation. Meditation is the path, not meditation about it. Geographic journey equals outer symbol of inner transformation. You become prepared, it appears. You remain unprepared, it remains inaccessible. Why did all the expeditions fail? Wrong motivation, corrupted seeking. Even Roerich with his peace banner, he sought external validation, proof he was chosen, that's attachment. David-Neel came closest. Genuine inquiry, no agenda. But even she looked in the wrong direction. Bulk was already destroyed. You're locked out by confusion, by karma, by lack of cultivation. The key isn't buried in the Himalayas. The key is how you live. Which brings us to the prophecy and what happens next. The Kalachakra texts contain a prophecy about timing, about what's coming. The texts describe a long line of Shambhala kings, but one matters most here, the 25th Kalki king. That's the figure associated with the final turning of the cycle. His name, Maitreya, the future Buddha. The prophecy places that turning point roughly 3,304 years after the Buddha's death. Depending on which date you use for the Buddha, you land somewhere around 2424 or 2425. In other words, not tomorrow, but not unimaginably far away either. The prophecy conditions: when the world declines into war and greed, all is lost. Then Shambhala's army emerges, but the army in the text reads like symbolism, a movement of teachers rather than soldiers. Weapons are Dharma teachings: wisdom, compassion, understanding. The war targets ignorance. Goal: restore Dharma, usher in a golden age, the Satya Yuga. Buddhism survives another 1,800 years after this event. Remember Padmasambhava? We covered him recently. According to tradition, he visited Shambhala in the 8th century, brought back Dharma teachings, treasures hidden for future discovery. We're finding them now, centuries later. The pattern. Shambhala reveals itself gradually through teachings, through prepared people. The texts say years of practice must begin lifetimes in advance. That's why Kalachakra initiations happen now, planting seeds for people who will live then. The Dalai Lama has given Kalachakra initiation 34 times. Hundreds of thousands of people have received it. Each initiation, planting karmic seeds for Shambhala connection, about being ready eventually, this life or future lives. The practice transforms you. When enough people transform, maybe that's when Shambhala appears. The Dalai Lama emphasizes something crucial about the prophecy. Live as if enlightened society is possible. Prepare as if Shambhala can manifest, because the discipline transforms us. Official Dalai Lama materials put it memorably. You do not find Shambhala by buying an airplane ticket. The ticket is merit. The Kalachakra Tantra contains the preparation: 6 yogas, complex visualizations, mantra recitation, energy work, available only through proper initiation, instruction, and long-term commitment. Creates conditions for perceiving Shambhala. Takes years, sometimes lifetimes. Thousands have completed this training. Their testimony: something shifts in perception, like getting glasses and suddenly seeing detail that was always there. We're obsessed with external solutions, paradise somewhere else, different circumstances, future utopia. Shambhala teaching: it's here, you're not ready yet. Become ready, it appears. Stay unprepared. Keep searching forever. The 20,000 people who left King Manjushrakirti's kingdom in 159 BC have been waiting over 2 millennia. What's another 400 years? That preparation starts now. When I was a kid watching Indiana Jones, I thought treasure hunting meant finding places. Turns out it means becoming someone who can see what was always there. I started looking for a kingdom in the Himalayas, found something completely different. Maybe it's not hiding from us at all. Maybe we're the ones who can't see it yet. Every seeker brought a different mind to the same mountain. What you see depends a lot on the kind of mind you bring. Maybe Shambhala isn't lost in the Himalayas. Maybe it's lost in us. The prophecy says year 2424, when the world falls into darkness, the armies of Shambhala emerge with teachers, with wisdom, with awakening. Maybe that's already happening. Ordinary people becoming extraordinary through authentic practice, through meditation. Shambhala isn't hidden because the mountains are hard to cross. It's hidden because most people look for the wrong thing. The Nazis looked for power. The Soviets looked for control. Roerich looked for validation. The Kalachakra teaching says, look for transformation. Become prepared, become ready, become awake. Maybe the kingdom appears. Because the point isn't to chase a hidden kingdom. It's to become the kind of person who could enter one. As a kid, I thought the treasure was gold. As an adult, it's perception. That Indiana Jones poster, still on my wall. But now I'm hunting for something different, the discipline to actually see what was always there. Funny how it all comes full circle. Spent my childhood obsessed with Atlantis and El Dorado. Spent my 20s studying Buddhism thinking I'd left all that behind. Turns out Buddhism was just showing me how to hunt for lost cities the right way. The question isn't where is Shambhala, it's who are you becoming? If you want to explore more mysteries like this, we've covered the 31 planes of existence, Pure Land Buddhism, and Padmasambhava's journey. Links in the description. And if this kind of investigation into Buddhist mysteries resonates with you, let me know in the comments what you want us to hunt for next. Thanks for watching. Keep seeking truth.